If your last lipid panel came back with high cholesterol and your cardiologist's first move was to reach for the prescription pad and write you up for a statin, and somewhere underneath that, quieter, harder to articulate, you've been carrying this feeling that there has to be more to the story than one number on a piece of paper. There is. The research from the last decade tells a very different story than the textbook your cardiologist memorized in medical school. There's one number. Almost nobody outside the inflammation research labs talks about it. Almost no primary care office tracks it, and it predicts heart attacks more accurately than your LDL ever has. Your cardiologist probably hasn't been taught it yet, not because they're a bad doctor, because the textbook hasn't caught up. The piece of the story nobody told you is that your arteries are not damaged by cholesterol the way you've been told. They're damaged by something quieter, slower, and much, much more reversible. And the strangest part of all of this, there's a published study where one common kitchen ingredient taken in 2 specific spoonfuls a day started rewriting the inflammation instructions inside DNA in 14 days, not 14 months, 14 days. I'm Dr. Jessica Ward. I've spent 15 years reading the cardiovascular and metabolic literature, and what I'm walking you through tonight is from peer-reviewed research, not opinion, not marketing, not a supplement I'm selling, not an affiliate link in the description. Before we go any further, I want to be clear. Everything I'm sharing is educational, not medical advice. If you take statins, blood thinners, blood pressure medications, or insulin, please talk to your doctor before changing anything in your routine. That conversation matters. It really matters. Don't take what I'm about to walk through and surprise your prescriber with it. Bring this video with you to the appointment if it helps. So here's where the story actually starts. In 2005, a researcher named Gary Beauchamp was at a tasting in Sicily, doing what scientists are not supposed to do at conferences, which is enjoy the food. He tasted a fresh, peppery, just pressed extra virgin olive oil. And he noticed something specific. And this is the part I love about how science actually moves forward. Somebody noticing something nobody else thought was worth noticing. The throat burn at the back of his palate, that little sharp catch you sometimes get from really fresh olive oil, was identical to the throat burn he got from liquid ibuprofen. Same exact location, same intensity, same quality. Most people would have shrugged. Beauchamp went back to his lab in Philadelphia. He isolated the compound. He named it oleocanthal. And in a 2005 paper in Nature, the most rigorous journal in the life sciences, he showed that oleocanthal inhibits the same 2 enzymes ibuprofen inhibits, COX-1 and COX-2. The 2 enzymes that drive systemic inflammation in your body. Now imagine that for a moment. The thing your grandmother poured on bread, the thing that's been sitting in the cupboards of every Mediterranean household for 4,000 years, is molecule for molecule doing what we put a synthetic drug in the medicine cabinet to do, except without the gut bleeding, without the kidney stress, without the cardiovascular risk that long-term ibuprofen carries. And yes, ibuprofen has cardiovascular risk. The FDA strengthened that warning in 2015. The math from Beauchamp's paper, when you do it out loud, comes out to roughly 50 milligrams of ibuprofen equivalent activity for every 50 grams of high polyphenol EVA-O consumed. That's about 3.5 tablespoons. So, when somebody on the Mediterranean coast drizzles their fresh olive oil over bread or salad twice a day, they're getting every day the anti-inflammatory equivalent of a low-dose pharmaceutical dose, only delivered through food in the same way humans have been delivering it for 40 centuries. Dr. William Li, the physician scientist who spent decades studying angiogenesis and food as medicine, has been pointing at this for years. He says, and the data backs him up, that high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil is one of a small handful of foods that genuinely talks to your body's repair systems. Repair, not just maintenance. There's a difference. Maintenance keeps the system from getting worse. Repair actively undoes damage that's already there. And Lee's framing, that food can speak to a repair pathway, not just to a metabolic one, is exactly what the methylation work I'm about to walk you through has now confirmed at the gene level. He was right. The studies that came out after Beauchamp's discovery just kept stacking, year after year, quietly. without making it onto a single morning show segment. Here's where it gets interesting. I want to walk you through the cardiovascular research mystery that I keep coming back to because it changed how I think about heart disease completely. The first time I read Esselstyn's 198 patient case series, I had to go back and check the numbers twice. I genuinely thought I was misreading the result. Caldwell Esselstyn at Cleveland Clinic, a surgeon, not a cardiologist, which matters for context, took 198 patients with documented coronary artery disease, not borderline, not high cholesterol, documented disease, angiograms showing blocked arteries, multiple events behind them, the kind of patient population that the textbook says is just there to be managed until the next event. Most of them had been told by their cardiologists that they were on a downward staircase, and the only question was how fast. Over 12 years, Esselstyn put them on a strict whole food, plant-based protocol with extra virgin olive oil as the primary fat source. The compliant subset, the people who actually stayed with the protocol over 12 years, had a 99.4% reduction in further cardiac events. 99.4. The textbook didn't even describe that as possible. The textbook described coronary artery disease as a one-way road. So I went looking for what was different about the people who responded. And the answer was uncomfortable for the cholesterol first paradigm. The compliant subsets LDL didn't move dramatically more than the non-compliant. Their inflammation markers did. Their HSCRP, that's high sensitivity C-reactive protein, a blood test that measures the level of fire in your circulatory system, collapsed in the compliant group. Their endothelial function, measured by flow-mediated dilation, normalized within months. Their answer wasn't lower cholesterol, it was lower fire. There was another paper I went back to after Esselstyn, Jenkins, 2011, JAMA, the Portfolio Diet Study. Jenkins took people with elevated cholesterol and put them on a portfolio of plant-based foods plus generous EVOO for 4 weeks, just 4 weeks. The LDL reduction in the diet group matched a starting dose of statin. The diet matched the drug. That paper sat largely outside the cardiology mainstream for a decade. Are you ready for this? Because it gets sharper. The PREDIMED trial, Spain, Ramon Estruc's team, 7,447 people, average age 67, all of them at high cardiovascular risk. Followed for almost 5 years, 3 groups. The control group ate a low-fat diet, which is what your doctor probably told your father to eat in 1995, low-fat, low cholesterol, swap butter for margarine, that whole framework. The 2 intervention groups ate a Mediterranean diet, but here's the key. One was supplemented with mixed nuts, the other with at least 4 tablespoons a day of extra virgin olive oil, real Evo, the high polyphenol kind, not the canola blend, not the warehouse shelf, olive oil with the suspicious label. Real Evo with measurable polyphenol content above 250 milligrams per kilogram. The result, when it came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, was so dramatic that they stopped the trial early because it would have been unethical to keep the control group on the low-fat protocol. The EVOO group had a 30% reduction in major adverse cardiovascular events: heart attacks, strokes, cardiovascular deaths. 30%. The p-value came in under 0.005. That's odds of less than 1 in 200 that the result was random. For perspective, statins as a class deliver about a 25% relative risk reduction in primary prevention. Olive oil, 2 to 4 tablespoons a day, outperformed the entire low-fat dogma your cardiologist still references when he tells you to skip the dressing. In 2018, the same group reanalyzed the data after some methodological cleanup. A few of the original cluster randomization arms had to be reweighted, and the result held: 30% effect size, reproduced. That doesn't happen often in nutrition research. PREDIMED held. But that raised a harder question. How? What is olive oil actually doing inside the artery wall to produce that result? And this is where the next decade of research got specific. A 2003 paper by Carluccio in atherosclerosis showed that within 14 days of EVOO supplementation, the molecules on the inside of your blood vessels, the adhesion molecules called VCAM1 and ICAM1, go quiet. Those adhesion molecules are what stick inflammatory white blood cells to the artery wall. They are the Velcro of plaque formation. When they go quiet, the wall stops accumulating new damage. 14 days, not 14 months, 14 days. And then a 2004 paper by Marugat in the Fayasib Journal showed something even stranger. A single 25 milliliter dose of EVU, that's about a tablespoon and a half, the amount you'd drizzle on one salad, measurably reduced oxidative damage to DNA within 3 hours. They measured it with a marker called 8-OHDG, which is the chemical fingerprint of a hydroxyl radical hitting your genome. 3 hours after a tablespoon and a half, your cells were measurably less damaged. Then in 2017, Garcia Calzon's team published in Clinical Epigenetics what is, for me, the most fascinating piece of this puzzle. They followed people on a Mediterranean diet pattern over 5 years and tracked DNA methylation at the genes that regulate inflammation: IL-6, TNF-alpha, the master inflammation switches. The methylation patterns shifted toward calmer, less inflammatory expression. In plain language, your body literally started rewriting the maintenance manual at the gene level, not just dampening inflammation in the moment, rewriting how the inflammation genes get expressed in the first place. That is DNA repair in the practical sense the audience wants to hear about, and it has the molecular biology to back it up. A 6-week intervention paper from Kaimanets in 2019 puts a clean number on the inflammation marker piece. EVO-O polyphenol intake at roughly the PREDIMED dose dropped hs-CRP by between 18 and 35%, depending on baseline. That's the difference between cardiologically elevated and cardiologically low inflammation status in 6 weeks. And then there's the study that, for me, broke the cholesterol-first paradigm cleanly: CANTOS, Paul Ridker, NEJM 2017. They took people with elevated hs-CRP, high inflammation, and gave them an anti-inflammatory drug called canakinumab. The drug did not lower LDL, not at all. LDL stayed exactly where it was, and they cut major adverse cardiovascular events by 15%. Same LDL, less inflammation, fewer heart attacks. That single result uncoupled inflammation from cholesterol so cleanly that the field has been rebuilding the framework ever since. CANTOS is what tells you, with no ambiguity, that inflammation is the upstream driver, and cholesterol is partly a downstream marker. A 2019 BMJ meta-analysis by Schwingshackle pulled 30 randomized trials together on EVO and mortality. The dose-response curve was clean. More EVO, up to about 3.5 tablespoons a day, was associated with lower all-cause mortality and lower cardiovascular mortality. There's no diminishing return until you get past 3.5 tablespoons. The randomized evidence finally caught up with the Italian and Spanish epidemiology that had been pointing here for decades. So what's actually happening inside your arteries? I want to give you the mechanism, but I'm going to anchor everything in one analogy because the research stops making sense if you keep switching frames. Think of your circulatory system as the plumbing in an old house. You've lived in it for 60 years. The pipes have a thin lining inside. That's the endothelium, the single layer of cells coating the inside of every artery you have. When that lining is healthy, water flows. The pipes stay clean. Pressure stays normal. Now imagine the chemistry of the water shifts. The pH gets a little off. Tiny scale crystals start forming on the inside of the pipe wall. You won't see anything from the outside. The flow looks normal. Pressure looks normal. The first thing that happens, and this is the part nobody can see on a standard physical, is the lining gets rough at the microscopic level. That's endothelial dysfunction, when the inner pipe lining stops working properly. It happens before any visible blockage. It happens before your stress test ever picks anything up. It happens 10 to 20 years before you have any symptoms at all. And once the lining is rough, 3 things start in parallel. 3 branches of the same problem, all running at once. First branch. Cholesterol particles, specifically the small, dense LDL particles, start sticking to the rough spots. Not because cholesterol is the villain. For 40 years, the textbook said cholesterol is the villain, and the data from the last decade says something different. Cholesterol is the building material. It only sticks where the pipe is already damaged. Insulin resistance is what makes the pipe damaged in the first place. Excess insulin in circulation, week after week, year after year, irritates the endothelium directly. It's the upstream lever. Cholesterol just goes where the pipe is already inflamed. The distinction between large, fluffy LDL and small, dense LDL matters enormously here, and it almost never gets explained in a primary care visit. Large, fluffy LDL particles are like beach balls, too big to slip through the spaces between endothelial cells. Small, dense LDL particles are like marbles, small enough to wedge into the rough spots, get trapped, and start the next phase of damage. Two people can have identical LDL numbers on their lipid panel, and one of them has mostly beach balls and the other has mostly marbles. The number on the page is the same. The risk profile is completely different. The way you tell the difference is a test called ApoB, and most cardiologists still aren't ordering it routinely. Second branch. Once those particles wedge into the rough spots, they oxidize. Oxidation is a chemistry word, but think of it as rust. The cholesterol particle rusts inside the artery wall, and the moment it rusts, the immune system flags it as foreign and sends in monocytes, white blood cells that try to clean it up. The monocytes engulf the rusted particle, become foam cells, and the foam cells are what we call early plaque. This is happening at the cellular level decades before any of it is visible on a CT. Third branch. The oxidative process generates more inflammation, which roughens more lining, which sticks more particles, which oxidize, which generate more inflammation, which roughens more lining. This is not a straight line. It's a cycle. Insulin resistance feeds visceral fat, that deep belly fat wrapped around the organs, which feeds inflammation, which feeds oxidized small dense LDL, which feeds arterial damage, which feeds back into insulin resistance because damaged arteries reduce blood flow to the muscle tissue that's supposed to be soaking up glucose. Once that loop is spinning, it accelerates. That's why people who, in their words, do everything right on cholesterol still end up in the cardiologist's office at 65, holding a stent referral and asking why. The cycle was spinning underneath the cholesterol number the whole time. The good news, and the reason this video exists, is that you can break any one link and the whole loop slows. Break two links and the loop reverses. Break three, and you start to see the kind of result Esselstyn documented. We're going to come back to this loop in the protocol section because every intervention I'm about to recommend targets one specific link in it. Now, where does extra virgin olive oil enter the cycle? Remember the plumbing? Oleocanthal acts like a scale solvent in the pipes. It directly inhibits COX-1 and QX2, the two enzymes that drive the systemic inflammatory tone. That's the inflammation link. Hydroxytyrosol, another major polyphenol in EVOO, restores nitric oxide bioavailability. That's the chemical signal that tells the smooth muscle inside the artery wall to relax and let blood flow. When nitric oxide is high, the lining stays smooth. When nitric oxide is low, the lining stays rough. EVOO directly raises it. That's the pipelining repair link. And the methylation work, that's the maintenance manual being rewritten at the gene level so that the inflammation doesn't get re-triggered as easily next month. 3 different layers of the same plumbing system, addressed by the same food. There's a fourth piece I want to add because it changed how I read the rest of the literature. Polyphenols also feed the right gut bacteria. Akkermansia mucinifila, in particular, a species that produces short-chain fatty acids and tightens the gut lining. When the gut lining is tight, fewer endotoxins leak into circulation. When fewer endotoxins leak, the systemic inflammatory tone drops at the source. So EVOO is hitting the cycle in 4 places: the COX enzymes, the nitric oxide pathway, the inflammation gene expression, and the gut barrier. 1 food, 4 levers. That's why the effect size in the trials is so unusually large. Most single nutrients hit 1 lever. Olive oil hits 4. I've shown you the research. I've explained the mechanism. Now, what do you actually do? Before I walk you through the protocol, I want to repeat the disclaimer because the audience for this video includes people on serious medications and the interactions matter. Everything that follows is meant to complement, not replace, your medical care. Especially if you're on warfarin, clopidogrel, or aspirin, your daily routine has anticoagulant load already. And adding high-dose vitamin K2 or fish oil on top of that is a conversation your cardiologist needs to be in. Bring this video to that appointment if it helps. Don't surprise your prescriber. Let me also compare the two paradigms a person over 60 will hear from their cardiologist today, because I want you to walk out of this with an honest picture of where the field actually is. Paradigm A says, high LDL drives heart attacks, statins lower LDL, therefore statins lower heart attacks. That's the framework that's been operating for 40 years, and there's real evidence for it in secondary prevention. People who've already had an event. I'm not anti-statin. For somebody who's already had a heart attack, statins are well supported. Don't read this as a reason to stop a medication that's keeping you alive. Paradigm B, what the last decade of research is actually pointing to, says insulin resistance and inflammation roughen the arterial lining, oxidized small dense LDL particles embed in the rough spots, and the LDL number on your standard panel is a poor proxy for the small dense subfraction that actually causes the damage. Under Paradigm B, lowering inflammation and improving particle quality matters as much as lowering the LDL number. PREDIMED, Esselstyn series, the methylation work, CANTOS, and the Schwing-Shackle meta-analysis all line up with Paradigm B. The cholesterol hypothesis is in the position the amyloid hypothesis for Alzheimer's was 10 years ago. The textbooks haven't caught up yet, but the data has moved. You don't have to wait for your cardiologist's continuing medical education cycle to start the protocol that the literature already supports. Priority 1, 2 tablespoons of high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil per day. That's the dose PREDIMED used at the low end of its protocol. They actually used 4 tablespoons in the EVOO arm, but 2 is where the published inflammation marker drop reliably shows up at 6 weeks. What to do? At breakfast, drizzle 1 tablespoon over eggs, avocado, or onto a slice of sourdough. At dinner, drizzle 1 tablespoon onto whatever you're already eating. Salad, cooked vegetables, soup, fish. Do not heat it past medium. EVOO has a smoke point around 375 Fahrenheit, which is fine for sautéing on low or medium, but the polyphenols are heat sensitive and you'll degrade the oleocanthal at high heat. Use it cold or warm. The pour over the finished plate technique is actually how the Mediterranean coast has used it for centuries. The cooking is done in a different fat or just water, and the EVOO goes on at the end. Timing nuance. Polyphenol absorption is meaningfully better with a meal than on an empty stomach. The shot of olive oil on an empty stomach trend you may have seen on social media is not what the absorption studies support. Take it with food. Carotenoid-rich food in particular, leafy greens, tomatoes, peppers, carrots, opens up polyphenol uptake by a factor of 2 to 3. The free cheap version, a single origin California EVO at Costco runs about $14 for a liter, and that gives you 30 days at 2 tablespoons a day, roughly 50 cents a day, cheaper than a coffee. The Costco Kirkland Organic, the California Olive Ranch single origin, the Trader Joe's California Estate, all under $20 a liter, all single origin, all in the polyphenol OK range. The expensive version, and I'm going to be honest with you, the expensive version does measurably matter, is a fresh-pressed single estate Tunisian or Sicilian or Cretan EVOO with a measured oleocanthal content above 250 milliormers per kilogram. Brands like Atsas, Morocco Gold, or Olive Paws publish their polyphenol numbers on the bottle. Those run $30 to $50 a liter. The polyphenol content is 2 to 3 times higher than supermarket EVOO, so you can either go cheap and double your dose or go expensive and stay at 2 tablespoons. The buyer beware test. If the bottle in your cabinet has been sitting open for 6 months, it's already lost most of its oleocanthal. EVO is a perishable. Treat it like fresh fish, not like a pantry staple. Keep it in a dark cabinet, capped tight, and finish the bottle within 2 months of opening. Buy smaller bottles more often. The pitfall I see most often, people buy olive oil labeled as such, but the bottle is actually a refined olive oil blend with seed oil fillers. The label will say things like olive oil blend or pure olive oil or light olive oil. None of those are EVU. EVU has to say extra virgin, has to be cold pressed, and ideally has a harvest date on the bottle that's within the last 12 months. If there's no harvest date, it's a red flag. The 2010 UC Davis report on supermarket olive oil tested major brands and found that more than two-thirds of extra virgin labels failed to meet the international EVO standard. That report is 15 years old now, and the situation has only marginally improved. Buyer beware. Measurable marker for priority 1, HSCRP. Get a baseline before you start. Recheck at 8 weeks. Most people on consistent 2 tablespoons a day with seed oils removed, priority 3, see a 20 to 40% drop in HSCRP by week 8. If your baseline was 3.5, you're aiming for under 2.0. If you're already under 1.0, you're tracking ApoB instead. Priority 2, pair the EVOO with a Mediterranean pattern meal at least once a day. EVOO works best with the company it keeps. Leafy greens, tomatoes, walnuts, a piece of fatty fish twice a week, wild salmon, sardines, mackerel. The polyphenol absorption goes up significantly when EVO is consumed with food rich in carotenoids, which is why drizzling it on salad outperforms drinking it from a spoon, even though the marketing of the day is going to tell you to do the spoon thing. Don't do the spoon thing. Eat it with food, the cheap version. Any leafy green from the produce aisle, any can of sardines from the canned fish shelf, any walnuts from the bulk bin. You can build this for under $5 a day. Salad with sardines, walnuts, tomatoes, and EVO. Total cost under $5, roughly 80% of the pre-dimed meal pattern in one bowl. That's the working class Mediterranean meal. It's not Instagram pretty, it works. Common pitfall on priority 2. People skip the fish because they don't like cooking fish. Canned wild salmon, canned sardines, and canned mackerel are nutritionally equivalent or superior to most fresh fish preparations, and you don't have to cook them. Open the can, drain, onto the salad, done. 2 cans a week at $3 a can is $6 weekly for the omega-3 piece of the protocol. Measurable marker for priority 2, triglyceride to HDL ratio. A standard lipid panel gives you both numbers. Divide triglycerides by HDL, aiming for under 2.0. Many Americans over 60 are sitting at 4.0 or 5.0. 3 months on this protocol, that ratio drops by 30 to 50% in compliant people. Priority 3, cut the seed oils. This is non-negotiable in the inflammation conversation, and it's the priority that quietly does more work than people realize. Seed oils, soybean, corn, canola, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed, grapeseed, are dose-dependently inflammatory because they raise the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in cell membranes, and that ratio is what determines the inflammatory tone of every cell in your body. The American average ratio is 16 to 1. The hunter-gatherer ratio that humans evolved on was 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. We're running our cells at 5 to 8 times the inflammatory load they were designed for. EVOO is monounsaturated, not omega-6 dominant, so it doesn't raise the ratio. But if you're cooking with seed oil and drizzling EVOO on top, you've canceled most of the benefit. The math on the omega-6 load matters. One restaurant meal cooked in soybean oil can deliver 20 to 30 grams of linoleic acid, which is enough to swing your tissue ratio for several days. 2 of those meals a week is what most people are actually eating. The free version of this priority is the easiest. Stop buying salad dressings, stop buying mayonnaise made with soybean oil, stop ordering food cooked in restaurant fryer oil twice a week. Cook at home in EVO, butter, ghee, or avocado oil. Make your own dressing. EVO, lemon juice, salt, pepper. That's it. That single change moves your ratio measurably in 30 days. Practical tactic. Read the ingredient list on every condiment in your fridge today. Most heart-healthy mayonnaise is soybean oil. Most Italian salad dressing is canola. Most olive oil mayonnaise has a tablespoon of olive oil in it and the rest is soybean. The label is designed to mislead. The ingredient list in the small font on the back is what actually tells you what's in the bottle. Priority 4. Walk after the largest meal. 20 minutes. This isn't an exercise priority, it's an insulin sensitivity priority. A post-meal walk drops the postprandial glucose spike by about 25% and gives the muscle cells a window to soak up glucose before insulin has to do all the work. That single habit, repeated nightly for 6 months, moves fasting insulin meaningfully downward. Free. Requires nothing but sneakers and 20 minutes. The cyclical loop has insulin resistance at its core, and a daily walk is one of the most underused levers we have on it. Test to ask your doctor for. At your next appointment, ask for 3 additions to your standard panel. APOB. That's a blood test that counts all the particles in your blood that can clog arteries, not just the cholesterol inside them. It's a more accurate predictor than standard LDL. LP(a), that's a one-time inherited variant test. Tells you if you have a genetic risk factor that statins won't fix and that nothing else fully fixes either, but knowing it changes your protocol. And fasting insulin with glucose, so you can calculate HOMA-IR, your insulin resistance score. These 3 tests are standard labs. Most insurance covers them. The optional 4th test, if you can talk your cardiologist into it, is hsCRP, the inflammation marker. It's already on most metabolic panels, and it costs almost nothing. The reason most cardiologists don't order it routinely is that the standard guidelines don't require it for primary prevention. They will order it if you ask. The conversation with your cardiologist changes the moment you have these numbers. You walk in with numbers, not with questions, and you walk out with a plan instead of a prescription. That's a small piece of agency the textbook system doesn't make easy, but it's there if you ask. Print this list. Bring it to the appointment. 3 things to know before you start. First, if you're on statins, do not stop them without talking to your cardiologist. We're adding tools, not subtracting them, and the secondary prevention evidence for statins after a documented event is real. If you've had a heart attack, the statin is keeping you alive. Don't read this video as permission to stop. Read it as permission to add another tool that the evidence also supports. Second, if you take warfarin or clopidogrel, the high-dose vitamin K2 conversation has to happen before you supplement, and even high-dose EVOO with daily fish oil can shift your INR. Bring the protocol to your prescriber. Get the labs adjusted. Third, if you've had a cardiac event in the last 90 days, heart attack, stent placement, bypass, your protocol needs supervision. This content is for prevention and long-term support, not for acute recovery. Timeline, what to expect. In the first 24 hours after a single EVO dose, the 8-OHDG marker, the DNA damage signature, measurably drops. That's the Marigat finding. You won't feel it. The cells will. In the first 2 weeks, the adhesion molecules on the artery wall, VCAM1, ICAM1, go quiet per Carluccio. Plaque, Velcro shuts off. By week 4, the inflammation markers, HS, CRP, IL-6, start moving. By week 6, the published Chemonet-style drop kicks in, 18 to 35% reduction in HS-CRP. Fasting insulin and triglycerides typically begin to drift downward in compliant people in the same window. By month 3, the LDL pattern starts shifting toward larger, less dangerous particles, and ApoB begins to drop. The PREDIMED style benefits, the ones that show up as actual cardiovascular events avoided, start accumulating in the background even though no individual feels different week to week. By month 6, blood pressure stabilizes for most people. The endothelial function, measured as flow-mediated dilation if your cardiologist runs it, normalizes. If you have a CAC score, the rate of progression slows. You won't get reversal in 6 months. You'll get plateau. 12 months in, the people who stay with the protocol, and this is the honest hedge, somewhere between 30 and 50% of people stay with it long term. Those people see structural changes that the textbook used to call impossible. Plaque stabilization, CAC progression at a fraction of the expected rate. Some published case reports of measurable plaque regression at 24 to 36 months in fully compliant individuals. Not most. Some. The literature supports stabilization for the majority and reversal for the strictly compliant minority. That's the honest framing. For those of you watching because someone you love had a heart event, I want to talk to you for a minute. The caregiver role is harder than anyone tells you. You're the one who fills the prescriptions and tracks the appointments and quietly worries on the drive home from the cardiology office. You're the one reading the symptom list at 2 a.m. when something feels off, you don't get a paycheck for it. Nobody is grading your work, and nobody is checking in on you. If your husband or your partner just had a stent placed, the most useful thing you can do this week is buy one bottle of real single origin Evo and start drizzling it on the food you already make for him. You don't need a conversation. You don't need an argument. You just need the bottle on the counter and the habit of using it. Small wins. The compliance research from PREDIMED showed that the people who stayed with the protocol were not the highly motivated patients. They were the patients whose spouses quietly changed the kitchen. That is your leverage. The food on the counter changes faster than the opinion in the head. By the time he notices the dressing is different, the inflammation markers have already started moving. If your parent, your mother, your father is the one resisting, the same principle applies. You're not having a debate. You're changing what's in the cooking pan. The PREDIMED population in Spain wasn't a cohort of disciplined health enthusiasts. It was Spanish grandparents who let their daughters and daughters-in-law take over the kitchen. The result was a 30% cardiovascular risk reduction. Quiet, consistent in the kitchen. That's the whole intervention. If they're early stage, diagnosed with elevated cholesterol, borderline blood pressure, pre-diabetic, the priority list above is exactly the protocol. If they've had an event already and are 90 plus days out, same priority list, run by their cardiologist first. If they're on warfarin, run priority 1 and priority 2 only, leave the supplements aside, talk to the prescriber. Caregiver wins are small wins repeated. We started with the question of what's actually damaging your arteries if cholesterol isn't the whole story. The research said it's the cycle: insulin resistance, visceral fat, inflammation, oxidized particles, all feeding each other. The mechanism walked through the plumbing, the lining, the rust, the foam cells, the coax enzymes, the nitric oxide pathway, the methylation patterns, the gut barrier. The protocol gave you the lever: 2 tablespoons of real extra virgin olive oil a day, paired with a Mediterranean meal, with the seed oils cleared out, with a 20-minute walk after the largest meal of the day. Navigating cardiovascular health feels overwhelming because for 40 years the answer was, take this pill for life and don't ask any more questions. That answer is out of date. You have more control than you've been told. Not total control. Nobody has total control, and anyone selling you total control is selling you something. But meaningful, measurable control. And it starts with 1 bottle of olive oil and 1 question for your cardiologist at your next appointment. Last word on buyer beware. The supplement industry has noticed the polyphenol research. There are now 80 a month olive leaf extract capsules being sold to people over 60 with the promise of doing what the food does. The food works because it's a complex matrix: oleocanthal, hydroxytyrosol, oleuropein, squalene, carotenoids, vitamin E, all in the same liquid, eaten with other carotenoid-rich food. The pill version is a single isolated compound at a dose that doesn't replicate any of the published trials. Don't buy the pill, buy the bottle. The food is the medicine. The pill is the marketing. Same logic applies to the polyphenol fortified olive oils that are starting to appear on shelves. Those are usually low-quality refined olive oil with a polyphenol concentrate added back in. Real FOO with naturally high polyphenols delivered through a real Mediterranean diet pattern is what every published trial actually used. If this resonated, the video on insulin resistance as the silent driver of arterial damage goes deeper into the cycle we walked through tonight. It's the piece most people miss. Comment below with the brand of olive oil you're using or thinking about using. I read every comment and they guide what I research next. Buyer beware, friends. The research is clear.